Who's got a sore head? Anyway, right, I am here to talk about planes, an area of passion for me. I absolutely love flying. A little bit about me. Who am I? I'm Ken. I am, some would say unlucky, others might say a shit pilot. I've done crazy stuff like accidentally landing at the wrong airport. I've had engines fail on me. That was awkward because we were about to fly over the channel. Bad day. Undercarriage got stuck up a few times. That was bad. One on my multi-engine flight test. I've nearly crashed into other airplanes 3 times. So great. Don't fly with me. I've told them, for ATC, for example, I wasn't there when actually I was much closer to Heathrow. I got in a bit of trouble for that. Fortunately for everybody here, whilst I studied for my commercial written exams, I never made it to an airline. So you're safe from me. I ended up starting a pen test firm back in 2002. And I continue to fly light aircraft, general aviation or GA. My passion is doing crazy stuff in planes. I went to the Baltics to learn to fly old Russian airliners, which are really bloody cool. Multi-engine flights. My favourite plane of all time is a Cherokee 6, which is great. And I flew that to Courchevel and landed at the 7th most dangerous runway in the world and nearly broke the plane. But good, let's not go into too much detail. Who are we? I founded a firm called Pentest Partners back in 2010. There are 150 of us as of yesterday. Come a long way since using a used desk in my garage many years ago. Along the way, we've learned a lot about hacking planes or not hacking planes. Boeing have recognised that experience and asked us to advise them, which is great. And we've also members of the DEF CON Aerospace Village, which I'll tell you all about a little bit later. Sort of planes we've worked on, everything from light aircraft through to bizjets, through to Airbus and really big Boeing planes, which are great fun. And we've done research into lots of the different systems that airplanes use. Now, before we start, planes are really, really hard to fix. So one vulnerability we found took about a week to fix the code and about 2 years to recertify it. So the vulnerability couldn't be rolled out until the code had been recertified. Every single possible combination of consequence was checked because you don't want the blue screen of death in the air. Really bad place to need to reboot your systems. There was an incident on certain airplane types that, yeah, you did have to do that in the air, but we won't talk about that. Something weird about the media, they seem to lose their shit when we talk about hacking planes. You need to be really, really careful. It takes a long time to fix them, and it's going to take a long time for organizations to actually get bugs fixed. But there are misconceptions out there. If you are sat back in the cabin, you cannot hack the airplane network going out there. There are pilots in control of the plane. They can disable systems. They can fly the plane manually. Even on Airbus, which is fly-by-wire, there are backup systems over backup systems. When everything goes wrong, there are still backup systems to get the plane safely onto the ground. It just doesn't work like that. So when I see press stories, which frankly are quite misleading, it makes me really angry because all that does is it destabilizes industry. It upsets the traveling public. My wife is a terrible flyer. She's shit scared of it. So the last thing I want to do is make my life harder for her when she's flying. So we have to be really, really responsible when we're talking about airplanes. You've probably seen some famous talks about, media stories about hacking planes. Most of them are simply not based on fact. Most of them are tweets or comments that got a bit out of hand and went a bit viral. I know the feds have investigated some of these. Some of them just didn't happen. So what's been going on? Why am I talking about planes? Biggest problem you've got with hacking an airplane is, you can't go buy them off eBay very easily. They're quite expensive. But something changed. In 2020, the world stopped. A lot of airplanes got retired very quickly. A lot of planes got laid up for periods of time. And the breakers yards got backed up. And actually, there's one up the road from here in Kemble, not very far away. We drove past, saw all the planes backed up, just gave them a call, said, those aeroplanes, what are you going to do? Well, we're taking them apart. When are you going to take them apart? Don't know, we've got loads backed up by 2 years at the moment. All right, if we give you some cash, can we come and have a play? I said, yeah, knock yourselves out. So we gave them some money to cover the cost of the Jet A1 to power their electronics, and off we went and learned. We had our choice of 7 different 747s to play with. How cool. There are some risks. Avionics bays typically run 400 volts. Very dangerous voltages and currents. It's hard to get access to systems. You might get lucky, but even the planes that are being retired are really old. Good example of one of the 747s we looked at last flew in March 2020. One of the systems was running Windows NT4 with a build date of 1997. You find really old stuff on planes. Powering the systems is difficult because it's dangerous. The protocols, we'll go into protocols a bit later on, the second half of the talk. Decoding can be a nightmare. One of the decoders is upwards of $30,000 just to decode and inject. But you do start to see some of the line replaceable units that you'll find in avionics bays start to pop up on eBay. So you can, for example, go and buy 15, 20-year-old components that are no longer certified, but you can start to learn from them. We've got racks of LRUs sat in the office. So how do planes work? Well, there is an increasing amount of connectivity on aeroplanes. So you'll find things like the in-flight entertainment in the passenger section. You'll see Wi-Fi connectivity connected via SATCOMs or downward-facing LTE. Up front, you've got the flight management systems are becoming increasingly connected using electronic flight bags we'll talk about in a minute. When you walk on board into an Airbus, typically, if you look left, you'll see the flight attendants panel. That's got an increasing amount of connectivity, particularly on the A350. On larger planes, you'll see what's called a CMT or cabin management terminal. And when your in-flight entertainment system doesn't work and they go and reboot it, they're using the CMT to reboot it. Increasingly on Airbus, you're starting to see FOMAX, so maintenance access in the air. On the ground, you'll find data loaders, which are dedicated systems for uploading signed code back onto the LRUs. And increasingly, we're just starting to see the concept of a quick access recorder now being done wirelessly. So Teledyne, big avionics manufacturer, now do wirelessly accessed quick access recorders, so you can quickly up and download maintenance data so you can keep planes flying and in the air safely. But there are 3 really important parts of the plane network. The bit in the back, the bit we sit in, the dirty bit, the Passenger Information Entertainment Services domain, PIESD, which is separated from the AISD or Airborne Information Services domain, which is what the cabin crew use, completely segregated from the ACD or Aircraft Control domain, which is the bit up front, the uppy, downy, lefty, righty bit. Right, completely isolated. There is only one connection on some older planes, which is a one-way data diode, which is the information from the flight management computer to update your moving map. You cannot hack back that way. It doesn't work. It's one way. So what sort of things go wrong? Let's look at some of the problems that have happened with IT-related connectivity for planes. This is one, Raven Air, regional operator in the northwest of the US. Ransomware hit, took out their maintenance system, took out their backup system. They couldn't prove their planes were airworthy. They couldn't fly. They went bankrupt. Bad day, right? Stuff goes wrong. Let's look at some of the connectivity. So electronic flight bags. You ever look left into the cockpit when you boarded? You'll see most of the pilots will be carrying a little tablet. Can be an iPad, can be a Droid tablet, occasionally a Windows tablet. Those tablets do all sorts of really, really interesting things. Back in the day, I used to carry a great big flight case around with me, which had all my charts, my maps with me. It had my tech logs with me. It had my approach plates. We don't do that anymore because it's a really inefficient way of carrying paper around. It's heavy and they get out of date really quickly. Whereas electronic charts can be updated every single month on what's called the AIRAC cycle, where everybody always has bang up-to-date paper charts, rather than, I kid you not, literally used to paste updates onto our paper charts. Anyway, what sort of crazy things go wrong? American Airlines, they had an outage. There was an issue with Jeppesen, who are a provider of approach plates. So that's how you arrive at an airport. And there was a really interesting incident where the approach plate for Reagan National, which is the national airport in Washington, not Dulles, it's Reagan National. And there was an issue with the Jeppesen approach plate application where 2 approaches for the same approach were published at the same time. It caused the application to corrupt, and it stopped all of American Airlines flights moving that day because they didn't have the system to approach properly. Southwest, they had an incident, so they lost their weather feed. Now, I know we think weather, look out of the window. Yeah, great. Yeah, but we need to know about the weather up there and our destination, right? Kind of useful, right? Have they got a crosswind? Is it in limits? What's the pressure altitude? Their weather feed system went down, so none of their planes went that morning. This is interesting. This is from an incident report involving a UK airline. The aeroplane type. This operator is very well known for flying Airbus A320s, but they have a few 321s as well. And there was a sync issue at the very last minute where the plane type was changed from a 320 to a 321, which is longer. But the weight and balance application set up the passenger loading for the 320. Which meant all the passengers on the 321 were loaded towards the front, and it created an out-of-balance situation where it was too nose-heavy. So none of this was picked up. So the plane piled off down the runway, pilot got to VR, rotation speed, pulled back on the stick, nothing happened. It was quite a short runway. Right? It was within performance, all safe, but the plane now wasn't going to go and take off. Pilot, this is why we have pilots, we don't automate flights, went, better do something up with this. So gave full toga power, takeoff, go around power, 100%. And the reason the plane got into the air was not because it increased speed, it was because of the rotational moment of the engines, because they hang off the wings and basically force the nose up. Yeah, bad day. That flight landed safely, but could so easily have gone so much wronger. This is another interesting one. So we do what we call takeoff performance calculations. You might not be aware that we very rarely use full power when we take off in a commercial plane. Why? Well, it wears the engines. It burns a lot of fuel, so it's expensive, and also sticks out a lot of carbon dioxide. So we don't want to do that. So we do what's called a performance calculation with our electronic flight bag. And what that does is we spit into it, for example, the length of the runway, weight of the plane, pressure, altitude, wind, lots and lots of different things. And that tells us and spits out our V speeds. So V1, that's the point if an engine fails, we can put the brakes on and stop before the end of the runway. VR, rotation speed. V2, the point at which we can safely climb away with one engine. And the gap between V1 and V2, if something goes wrong, you go over the end of the runway. Bad day, right? Anyway, so this is Lisbon Airport. And they'd done some work on the runway intersection markings because they were doing some runway works. And all the intersection markings defined how much runway you had. So it's quite rare you might use the full end of the runway. One of the short-haul airliners will use a displaced intersection. Pilots misunderstood the naming conventions and put the wrong intersections into their performance calculator. So they told the performance calculator they're at the full length of the runway, whereas in fact they were at a displaced intersection. So the performance calculator goes, hey, you've got 3,000 meters of runway. We only need about 55% power for that. They actually needed about 88. And what happens? So they pile off down the runway. Great. It's all fine. Went to rotate. Nothing happens. Carry on a bit further. Oh, this is getting a bit edgy. Now, all 8 flights this affected took off safely and climbed away safely, but they were too low. They bust what's called the screen height or the safety height. That was investigated very quickly and fixed, but it could easily have gone so much further wrong. Earlier this year, Air Alaska had a ground stop. They had 2 tail strikes. There was a bug in their performance calculator for their electronic flight bags. It caused 2 tail strikes within a few minutes of each other because the performance calculator was mishandling the weight data. That happened again, a related incident to weight and balance on April 17th. The bit I was most impressed with, actually, was the way that Alaska handled this. They saw the tail strikes and thought, something's wrong. Ground stopped the entire fleet to work out what had happened. Really cool. But it can get a whole lot worse than that. This is the backside of a Spanish operator, I believe, ripped the backside out of their plane because they calculated their weight as being 100,000 pounds lighter than it was. So instead of taking off, they just dragged the backside out of the tail. It caused a huge amount of damage. And very sadly, there have been fatalities related to performance calculation issues. This was in Halifax, in Nova Scotia. And very sadly, a freight 747 miscalculated their weight, didn't apply enough power, and never properly took off. Went straight through the ILS into a berm, and very sadly, the plane caught fire, crashed, and everyone died. Thank goodness it was only a freight operation, but still very, very sad. So, other crazy stuff. This is Quito Airport in South America. It's a very challenging approach because it's surrounded by hills, a lot of rollover wind, very difficult approach. And there'll be some cases where pilots use their electronic flight bags to calculate not only their takeoff, but also their landing. So they'll choose the auto brake settings. And the reason you wouldn't go full all the time is it's quite dynamic and also wears the brakes. So you choose the auto brake setting that you need. In this case, they miscalculated it, they chose the wrong setting, piled off the end of the runway, and that was the end of the aeroplane. So where I'm getting to with all this is, could we cause such an incident with a cyber hack? And the answer is we believe so. So back to those electronic flight bags, the various things that they do. The first major problem we keep finding is a lack of forethought and real lockdown on those EFBs. So we've seen UK and European and US operators with no pin on the flight bag, with a really simple pin. I know one very large UK airline that uses the pilot's birthday. Not that we could find that out, I'm sure. We find a lack of MDM in place, so a lack of lockdown. In some cases, on smaller operators, pilots told to source their own electronic flight bags by going to the electronics store. Wow. And also, we see challenges, a breakdown of comms between flight operations and also with pilots. They don't understand each other. They don't talk the same language. We think about locking down devices. Pilots think about how they use it. And a great example of that is we saw one operator thought, I know what we'll do. We'll get our iPad electronic flight bags and we'll use Face ID. And then cause chaos because a lot of pilots like using mirrored sunglasses. Oops. That caused problems. And another really serious issue is the electronic flight bag. One of its functions is to provide what's called the Emergency Quick Reference Handbook, the QRH. And in the event of an incident, the first thing that happens is we'll, for example, in a depressurization incident, like losing a door plug maybe, first thing we'll do is we will automatically do a crash dive to breathable altitude, so typically 10,000 feet. So we'll do that check from memory. And then as soon as we get stable at 10,000 feet, we'll go back to the EQRH on our EFB and check through whether we did it correctly and what the follow-up procedures are. That's really difficult if you've got a pressure mask on, if you're breathing oxygen because you've got depressurization going on. And there's often a breakdown in comms between flight operations and IT security operations on the ground. There are loads of things that flight bags do. They're all there for efficiency, safe dispatch, and safety critical matters. Really, really good devices, but if we don't get their security right, we can cause problems. So let's talk about some vulnerabilities we found in EFBs. Okay. First one we found was in Boeing's OPT. That's the onboard performance tool, their performance calculator. Spits out V-speeds. You put loads of data in. I've played with one of their installed ones on a 777 as well. What did we find? All the data's in there. Unsurprisingly, SQLite databases, and there was no local signing at all. Obviously, this is a local attack, which means you have to have access to that EFB for a short period of time. So what it meant is, for example, Heathrow 27 right is 3,658 meters. Change it 10,000 meters, which makes the performance calculator think you've got a really long runway. Obviously, that's a course error. I might spot that as a pilot, but if it was an interplay of numbers, I might miss it. As a result, it spits out the incorrect V-speeds, and the consequence is either a tail strike or a runway excursion. I love that phrase, runway excursion. Sounds fine, doesn't it? It's a crash, right? Okay. Boeing are brilliant. I know they've had a lot of bad press over the years. They were actually really, really good at handling vulnerabilities. We disclosed it in September 2020. It took 2 years to get fixed. We understand why that was. And then they did coordinated disclosure with us. Really, really cool. Love Boeing. This is an installed EFB from a 747. It was kind of an aftermarket fit. Believe it or not, there are aftermarket products. You can't go down to Halfords to get one of these, but yeah, you do get aftermarket products. This was a second EFB. As you can see, it's a Windows tablet, really poorly locked down. Great. Password. Fantastic. They were networked together, so there were two of them. So often we'll have two devices for redundancy in a cockpit. So we'll have one EFB, second EFB. We do concurrent checks, you cross-check as pilots with your co-pilot. Unfortunately, these were networked together, which meant you could compromise both devices from one. So it kind of defeated the value of that cross-check. They had USB port on it with a sticker on it, said don't use it. Great, fantastic. Okay, more up to date. This is Airbus. We haven't actually fully disclosed this vulnerability. It has been fixed though. This is Airbus's charting package. It's called FlySmart LPC-NG, less paper cockpit. So we'd use less paper. Great, love them. NG Next Generation. They had essentially exactly the same vulnerability as Boeing had in OPT. Frustratingly, Boeing really, really receptive. Airbus, I hate to say it, they were a bit of a nightmare. It took us 3 years to get them to get this vulnerability fixed. In the end, so they actually, we went through the disclosure process, couple of years, and finally came back and said that fixing this vulnerability, according to our risk assessment, would be a product improvement. Oh, okay. So I then spoke to an airline who used it and said, yeah, why don't you have a chat with the regulator? So we got in touch with EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, and said, we found this vulnerability. What do you think? We think it violates one of your regs. And they said, yeah, we agree. Hold my beer. 2 days later, vulnerability got fixed. Another one in Airbus, this has been fixed. Airbus did accept this as a vulnerability. This is a similar package. It was the updater for the various software packages. What happened with this one? So it was an iOS application. They'd intentionally disabled application transport security, which meant you could man in the middle. Now, man in the middle, meh. But actually, this really interesting way that pilots behave and airline operators work is they always fly the same route and they always stay in the same hotel, which means you know where the pilots from that airline are going to be at any point in time. So actually, a man-in-the-middle attack becomes a bit more plausible. What it meant is we could tamper with the updates and force duff data into the performance calculators. That is fixed. Then Lufthansa. Lufthansa also have a subsidiary called Lufthansa Systems that write applications for flight bags. Really cool organization. They had a similar charting application with a similar vulnerability, but it did sign the contents with an AS key, but the key was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Anyway, what that meant is you could tamper, and I'll walk this through, I think we've got time. You could tamper with the approach plates. So I'll walk through what's going on here. This tells me how to arrive at an airport. So what I do is arrive at 5,000 feet at DME, distance 14 miles from BRA VOR, so that's navigation rate, at my IF, initial fix. Okay. I can then descend safely to 4,600 feet to DME 12.4 miles from approach, D, top of descent. I then approach on a bearing of 170 degrees down to my safety height of 3,900 feet to my final fix, safety height 3,900 feet at DME 9. I can then approach to my minimum descent altitude to the middle marker at DME 4, at which point I either commit to land or I go away and fly and try again. You can tamper with all that and make it all wrong, so planes crash into the ground. Oops. It's all been fixed. We're fine. They were really, really cool. Still took 2 years to fix it, but Lufthansa were really, really good and did a great job of fixing it. I love it. The last place I want to go with cockpit systems is those tablets have always been isolated, right? So I will take the data, I will key it in manually, I'll cross-check it with my co-pilot. Increasingly, we're now seeing integration. We're starting to see integration with cockpit systems. And one of the very first planes to do was with the Airbus A350. Amazing plane. Love it. But they actually have a Windows laptop in the cockpit, which integrates with those two outer screens. It can do everything that a portable EFB can do, but can present it onto the outer screens. And that EFB has integration using a protocol called ARINC 324, which is a plain text protocol that splits data into flight management systems. Interesting, hey? I've been trying so hard to get hold of one of those EFBs to play with. I'm really working hard with a couple of airlines to say, go on, have a play. Let's go. Anyway, regulation is quite interesting because that's what got Airbus to fix one of the bugs in EASA. So Europe, they've actually got really good regs. So we've had what's called AMC 2025A. Yeah, more TLAs than cyber. Brilliant. Which controls a lot of what goes on in electronic flight bag security. FAA completely different. There are no regs over portable electronic flight bags. You can do what you want. Wow. Okay. CAA, obviously post-Brexit, things are a bit weird, but you do have SRG, Safety Regulation Guide 1849, which covers a degree of security assurance on portable electronic flight bags. I think there are huge holes in the regs. I think we've got a long way to go. EASA are bringing out what's called Part IS next year, which is a much better compliance framework, which I think will really help improve cybersecurity across the aviation sector. Now, I thought we'd talk a little bit more and have a bit of fun and use that to explain some of the principles of avionic networks and how they work. So I thought we'd talk about hacking planes in the movie, right? Who doesn't love a bit of Jeopardy? Right? We love a bit of cliffhanger, right? So why would I spend my time critiquing an interesting and engaging plot? Well, I'll be honest with you, I find myself shouting at my TV when you see plane hacking shows. It makes me really cross. So I thought it would be interesting to dispel some of the myths. I still overhear people say, oh yeah, they hacked that plane, it's really easy. It's like, it's not. It's really bloody hard. So let's take apart a few movies. Now, where are we going to start? Best plane hacking movie of all? Come on, Die Hard 2! Yippee-ki-yay! Go, Bruce. So let's look at the plot behind. Has anyone not seen Die Hard 2? All right, you're screwed. I'm going to make a real mess of the plot for you. Okay, so what happens? Right, there's some terrorists involved, and they decide that they're going to compromise the instrument landing system at Dulles. That's IAD. That's the Washington, D.C.'s international airport. The plot goes roughly, there's a snowstorm across the whole of the East Coast, resulting in what's called Category 3 auto-land conditions. Cat 3 auto-land, so I've got no visibility. I can't see the runway lights, so I program 3 channels on our autopilots to do a safe approach. It even does the flare for me, right? Actually, the hard bit in Cat 3C is getting from the runway to the terminal. That's quite hard. So that's what Cat 3C looks like. Problem is that making movies in fog doesn't work very well. So that's a massive plot hole in itself. And the plot is basically the instrument landing system intersection is 200 feet lower than it should be. And what that is supposed to do is it causes aeroplanes to crash into the runway and disintegrate and blow up in flames. Great. So, first things first, we don't even take off into a situation like that. We will always have, in our instrument flight rules, flight plans, we will have an alternate. And by law, we have to know that the conditions are clear there. We can hold, divert, hold, land. By law. We can't even go. There are also a lot of options. Right? We wouldn't have even gone if the whole of the east coast of the US was covered in the snowstorm. That would have been predicted. We knew it was happening. All right. There are so many other runways we could have landed on. That is east coast of the US. You've got Washington. You could just about get a heavy into Reagan National. It's a bit short, but in an emergency. You've got Baltimore up there. You've got all sorts of other runways you can go. So that jeopardy bidding doesn't work. You don't have to go to Dulles. You can go somewhere else. Then I've been working in aviation for, since 1996, and I've never seen the altitude wheel at a controller's desk. Whoa. And I love this. They spent so much time doing it. They used a light pen, it's really nicely done, to drag the instrument landing system down. Wow. Okay. That doesn't happen, right? It just doesn't work like that. But I don't know if you noticed, they've actually really spent some real time working on the approach. So you can see the various marker beacons, you can see the glide slope, but it's all cobblers. Anyway. So, they dropped the intersection down 200 feet. Would it work? Would you crash? No. Your descent rate on the instrument landing system, depending on your head or tailwind, is between 600 to 700 to 800 feet per minute. You can land a plane at 700 feet a minute. It's a heavy landing. It's going to involve an engineering inspection. You're probably not going to damage the plane, but it'll certainly fly again, and it certainly won't explode into flames. So that bit doesn't work. The instrument landing system, well, technically, hacking an ILS is bloody difficult. You can put out rogue signals, but you've got to have a hell of a lot of power, and it's going to be really obvious what you're doing. Someone will be out there looking. Transmitters look like that. Can you mess around with them? So you've probably seen those at the end of the runway. That is the localizer, so that's the bit that gives you the centre line of the runway. There's another antenna which gives you the glide slope, which is you fly down about 3 degrees. So can you tamper with the glide slope? Yes, you can. Typically, glide slope is 3 degrees. Charles de Gaulle is 4. For reasons on one of the approaches. London City Airport, you probably know, coming in over Canary Wharf, they have a 5.5 degree approach. It used to be 6.7 until they safely did it at 5.5, which is great. But what they're doing in Die Hard is that they're changing the runway intersection point. That means moving the ILS array. So you'd have to dig a hole 200 feet deep and put the ILS in there in order to affect their attack. So effectively, that's the runway at Ladystad. You had to do that. And you could put the ILS, kind of awkward attack. The other problems you have with the attack is we also use a radio altimeter. So when we're doing Cat 3C, we need very, very precise data about our altitude, even more precise than our barometric altimeter. So the RADALT works a bit like a submarine ping. Sends out a radio ping, brings back a signal, gives us a very precise height, which means we can very carefully flare and land safely. Yes, there are issues with radio altimeters. You probably saw a story about potential interference with 5G. There's also a couple of US universities looking at RADALT spoofing. But the practicality of that attack would basically mean driving along the runway at airplane speed, pointing a radio antenna at the plane to convince it to flare too high. Yeah, no. We also use DME. So on an approach, we'll do at least one cross-check over DME using distance measuring equipment to make sure we're at the right point on the approach. We'd also use integrity monitoring. Would use our barometric altimeter to do a cross-check too. And also the integrity of the instrument landing system is monitored by ATC. So just none of this works, unfortunately. So, all right, how would I have done it? How are you going to hack a plane and make it crash into the ground? Well, you've got the Die Hard 2 version or a potential option, and actually just take the ILS offline. And instead of coming down a precision approach, you use what's called a non-precision approach using other instruments, for example, your VOR, so that's a radio aid, and potentially distance measuring equipment. And believe it or not, it actually happened. This is an incident report from an approach into Charles de Gaulle in Paris. There was confusion between the controller and the cockpit around the barometric altimeter pressure setting. One said 1011, the other said 1001, and it was misunderstood, misinterpreted. The instrument landing system was offline for maintenance, and the airplane approached with the wrong pressure setting, meaning it was 300 feet lower than it thought it was. It was queried by the controllers. Ground proximity was disabled because it is when you're on approach. Otherwise, it would just give you alerts because you're landing. They came within 6 feet of crashing into the ground a mile from the threshold. Crazy, right? It's real. This is what happens when you take instrument landing systems offline and people do weird things. So there are real issues there. What would I do? A lot of approaches, particularly at smaller airports now, are GPS. There was an incident relating to the conflict going on between Russia and Ukraine, involved a lot of spoofing going on, particularly in areas around the Middle East, but also in Estonia, and Finnair had to cancel their flights into an airport called Tartu because of GPS spoofing issues. And if you want to go into more detail of that, I gave a talk at DEF CON about GPS spoofing, not just affecting approaches, but also grounding an aeroplane, making it inoperable. I'll come back to that another time. Let's talk about another shouty TV moment. Let's talk about a Netflix documentary. Very sad incident, MH370, the loss of the Malaysia Airlines plane. Very sad. What made me really cross was the fact that I think Netflix are exploiting cynicism about this. Episode 1, awful, but the commonly accepted theory is it was pilot murder-suicide. Then they had this episode 2, which is about a Russian special ops team that took control of the plane from the avionics bay to distract everyone from what was going on with the invasion of Crimea at the time. Great. So here's broadly what they've suggested happened. So there was a 777, 300ER. Unusually, it does have access to the avionics bay from inside the passenger cabin. It's just up by the forward station behind the cockpit. So the idea was that a Russian special ops team pressed the distraction. One of them had jumped into the avionics bay, connected their Windows laptop to the avionics, and then changed where the plane went. The bit that worked, you could turn off the cabin pressurization, caused the pilots to die, caused the passengers to die. They then took control of the plane. I zoomed in on this, spent quite a bit of time. They're using a UEFI BIOS exploit and DNS exfiltration against avionics. It's always DNS. And then some weird shit about Inmarsat, and apparently they flew the plane north and apparently they landed in one of the stans. Anyway, so let's take that one apart because it annoys me. So if you did have a depressurization event at 36,000 feet, number one is the pilots would instantly recognize that and they would punch in for the plane to descend in a crash dive to 10,000 feet. They might pass out while it's doing that crash dive. It would take a few minutes to get there. It's a horrible experience if you've ever been in there. The rubber jungle comes out. But you get there. And the pilots at 10,000 feet would wake up again. Even if their own masks was disabled because someone was down below. Just wouldn't work. Some of the modern Airbuses, if they sense depressurization, auto crash dive unless you interrupt it for safety reasons. They also chose the wrong plane. These so-called Russian special ops team is the 777-300ER does have fly-by-wire. However, the outboard spoilers are connected physically to the flight control. So even if someone was somehow messing around with the avionics and causing the plane to move, you'd still have a degree of control. The other thing, talking about aviation networks, is they chose the wrong aeroplane to do their hack on. The 777 is really, really unusual because it uses an unusual avionics protocol. So most of the planes that you've been in, 320, 737, 757, 767, you name it, use a protocol called ARINC 429. It's not really a network as such, it's a point-to-point protocol. However, that involves a lot of wiring. Now, in order to save cable weight and save fuel, new protocols emerged. ARINC 629 was developed specifically for the 777. It's an inductively coupled bus network, so you can simply have couplers, I have some, bolt onto them, massively reduces the cabling weight on the aeroplane. For some reason, it wasn't a particular success, so it's only used on the 777. Later planes, 787 Dreamliner, Airbus A380 use a different protocol called ARINC 664 AFDX, which is Ethernet-based. Doesn't use IP, but it is Ethernet-based. Sound intriguing, right? So they chose the wrong plane to target. That's one of my colleagues. Alex, that is a $30,000 ARINC 629 decoder, which we had to buy specifically for this job. Crazy, right? So they chose the wrong plane to hack. The other thing is you don't just plug into avionics and hack them. It doesn't work. The LRUs, the avionics won't take updates. They're signed. Believe it or not, that's the data loader from the 737, uses floppy disks. One of the 747s I was on that was flying in March 2020 also uses floppy disks. Crazy stuff. How'd you do it? I wouldn't. All right. So I want to go to the very last one now, which is Scorpion. This is 2014. Do you remember the TV show? Does anyone remember the pilot episode? Yeah, good. Horrific show. Absolutely not like Mr. Robot, which I thought was quite cool. Let's look at Scorpion, right? So It's nuts. There's some jumped up plot where there's some software on the plane that ATC need on the ground in order to allow the plane to land. I'm like, what? Okay. So anyway, so what they do is they bring the aeroplane down into ground effect on the runway and then get a Ferrari and drive along at 160 miles an hour. So ground effect for a plane like that, sort of heavy, is going to be about 140 knots. So 160 miles an hour. So they drive along the runway, giving themselves about 25 seconds, and then they dangle a cable down from the undercarriage to the car where the sidekick gets a laptop, plugs it in, downloads the software, and sends it to ATC, and now the plane can land. Great. This is fantastic. So that's the avionics bay for this aeroplane. I've never seen an EE bay that looks anything like that. They're tiny, they're small, they hurt. You don't want to be down there in turbulence. And the co-pilot opens a hatch on the side of the avionics bay. That's what they really look like. And then connects an Ethernet cable into one of the avionics and then dangles a cable. So that's the one they were using, RJ45. That's a real aviation Ethernet connector. You don't use them in avionics, but you might use them on the in-flight entertainment. That's called quadracs. That's what, real avionics bays look like. They're small, horrible, and painful places to be. You cannot go from the avionics bay to the undercarriage. Well, you can on the 747, but we'll talk about that. But you climb down in 160 mile an hour breeze. It just doesn't work, right? And then you dangle an Ethernet cable. It goes that way, not down, right? Anyway. There's some bloopers as well. The undercarriage handle, if you can see, it's actually up. That didn't work. And then somehow they managed to film it with a light, an airfield light in the middle of the runway. Crazy shit. And then, given this pilot has just done the most incredible ground effect, a couple of feet up and down, all the way down the centre line of the runway, in the last stage of the segment, he then buzzes the tower. Whoa, this is a pilot with insane skills. Why would he buzz the tower? Anyway, all right. Was there really a script in there? No, absolutely not. But I've made a little video. We had a bit of fun doing this. I'm hoping it's going to play for you. Let's see if it's going to behave. Right. So, we mercilessly edited this. So this is the 747. There is genuinely a hatch in the avionics bay that leads down to the undercarriage. So you can see that. There is also, amazingly, one system with an RJ45. We mocked this up. It doesn't work. So we parked a car. It's not moving, really, honest. So then we got a laptop out in our best hacking skills. Then uploaded some software to the aeroplane. And what we successfully managed to do was we compromised the in-flight entertainment system and managed to upload Scorpion, the segment, to the in-flight entertainment system of the entire car. We were having a laugh, all right, just to prove how ridiculous it was. So plane hacking is hard. There's a lot of very unusual systems in there. Please don't hack planes, right? Don't go and get on board your next flight and think you can hack a plane, right? You'll get arrested, right? It's not a good thing to do. If you have permission, so there are a few airfields around you can call up. I'm hoping to do an open session on one of the 747s sometime next year. It's quite expensive to do, but it's really, really good fun. It's a baptism of fire, but there's lots of stuff you can break on the 74. Planes are complicated. They have massive technical debt. As I said, we found systems with build dates from 97 on some of these planes. If you do find something, don't be a dick, right? You can really destabilize industry by sharing stuff that's not fair and appropriate. We can help you with disclosure. We know how to disclose. We know the various communities. We know the various operators. They will listen if you approach them in the right way. There is also quite a bit of research going on. It's a small community right now, but my favorite thing is the DEF CON Aerospace Village, which we were a co-founder of together with 4 other organizations, where we bring researchers together to share knowledge, to learn, to understand, and really pay it forward in terms of making aviation cybersecurity a little bit better. If you want to learn a bit more, there is absolutely loads about this on our blog, including some recent talks from DEF CON, where we talked all about GPS spoofing and also some of the other vulnerabilities we found. Thanks for listening. I think we might have 1 or 2 minutes for questions. Has anyone got a question? Good. Anybody never want to fly again? There's a question here.
Oh, no.
You don't want to fly again? Sorry. Any other questions out there?
Oh, okay. Think about ships. They're a lot easier to hack, presumably.
Yeah, completely different network protocols. Again, we do quite a bit in transport. We know quite a bit about ships. So there's a load about hacking ships in our blog too. Gosh, quick summary of ships is they use different protocols. Serial protocols, NMEA 0183, typically found on commercial vessels. If you're going onto a super yacht, you'll find it's using NMEA 2000, which is electrically compatible with CAN. So it's basically a car. But yeah, same problem you're going to have is getting ships, getting components. It's very, very difficult to get hold of vessels to go and have a hack of. Yeah.
Just a quick one. Do I need to put my phone on flight mode?
No! Load of old cobblers, that is. So look, there was one reported incident donkeys years ago where somebody's phone went off. And at the time, there wasn't as good electronic shielding. So it was more of a just in case. So I think the autopilot tripped off in sync with someone's phone going off. But nowadays, those components are really well shielded in light of phones. So yeah, do turn your phone off because the battery will last longer. But don't, yeah, anyway. Cool.
Nice one.
Thank you.